Thank you. I think there are 4 remaining colleagues wishing to contribute. On the assumption the wind-up speeches begin no later than 6:40, colleagues can do the arithmetic for themselves, but we have just under half an hour for 4 speeches. Mr Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a privilege to follow a very moving speech by my honourable friend from Crewe in Nantwich, who outlined some severe problems faced by our social care service. But on a slightly different note, last year I had the pleasure of attending the launch of our renovation works to a historical primary school in my constituency. Derelict for several years, the school lies at the heart of the Park House district of Glasgow North East, which I represent. And the Wheatley Group, the inheritor of Glasgow's municipal housing stock, acquired it for conversion to new sheltered social housing. The name Wheatley and the history of the school itself evoked a reflection on the long and proud heritage of municipal socialism in Glasgow and what the prospects might be for that tradition to re-emerge in the future. Park House was one of the first districts to be developed for municipal housing by the Glasgow Corporation after the passing of the historic 1924 Housing Act during the first Labour government, led by the Glasgow Labour MP John Wheatley. These state subsidies for house building led directly to the creation of Glasgow's Municipal Housing Department and saw a large-scale building of some 57 new homes in Park House and other districts like Verdry and Carntine in my constituency during the interwar period. Indeed, the pressure to develop suitable land for new municipal housing led to Glasgow more than doubling in size, from over 5,000 hectares to over 12,000 hectares during the 1920s and 1930s. At that time, the gas supply, water, electricity, subway, hospitals, tramways, even the telephone system were all in direct municipal ownership. And there was much talk of Glasgow as being a European model for municipal socialism. Indeed, at the International Conference on Workers' Dwelling Houses in Paris in 1900, a Glasgow councillor, Daniel Macaulay-Stevenson, after learning that municipal control of housing was regarded as impractical by those delegates at that conference, remarked that far from that being the case, it had been carried out to an ever greater extent for 29 years in Glasgow, and elucidated the Glasgow Corporation's extensive portfolio of services under municipal ownership. And the delegates regarded that as nothing short of rank socialism. So it's interesting to see some of those sentiments don't change, even though we're almost a century further on. But the scale of that sort of intervention to address the city's social problems is scarcely imaginable today. There is simply no capacity or scope within local government to undertake that sort of mission-driven improvement that can massively improve quality of life. Today in Scotland, after 2 decades of devolution, we now have the most centralised system of government of any country in Europe. We now have the absurdity of the Glasgow City region's wealthiest suburbs carved up into self-contained enclaves, where the residents enjoy relatively low rates of council tax, while the urban core of the city itself is home to some of the poorest communities in the region, yet those residents must carry the burden for maintaining and operating all the core services and amenities that are enjoyed by its wealthier suburban free riders. Not only has Glasgow been stripped of its residential tax base through historic depopulation and relatively recent gerrymandering of its suburbs, but the advent of the Scottish Parliament has seen a continuing war of attrition against the power of local government. The Scottish Government this year is set to impose cuts in Glasgow that are unprecedented in recent times and will lead to a further decline in public services in the city. According to the Scottish Parliament's Information Service, the local government revenue budget was cut by 6.9%, whereas the Scottish Government's revenue budget fell by just 1.6% between 2013 and 2018. And over the same period, Glasgow City Council's core budget has been cut 12.8%. That's almost twice the average cut to Scotland's 32 council areas and 7 times the cuts to the Scottish Government. They are proposing a further disproportionate cut to Glasgow of 3.6% this year, or £41 million. Whilst there is no question the Tories are to blame for cutting the Government in Edinburgh's block grant by 1.6%, to multiply the percentage cut by 4 to 6.9% for councils and by even more than that in Glasgow is a deep injustice, Mr Speaker. The only conclusion we can draw is that local government, and Glasgow in particular, has been targeted disproportionately. Our city is having to absorb a cut to its budget proportionally 7 times greater than the cut being absorbed by the Government in Edinburgh, and that is £233 per head for each Glaswegian between 2010 and 2018. Already 30,000 Scottish Council jobs have gone, swimming pools have been closed, community health projects face non-renewal, class sizes are rising, pupil attainment is stalling, high streets are declining, community groups are losing grants, youth clubs are closing, grass has been left uncut, litter piling up, roads and pavements are in serious disrepair, and social workers are facing ever-increasing caseloads. In Glasgow North East, we faced the potential closure of a local swimming pool, sports centre and numerous municipal golf courses that were only spared cuts this year after a determined local campaign to save them, causing such embarrassment that the council reversed its decision. Glasgow is unfairly bearing the brunt of decisions to scale up the cuts as a share of its overall budget in comparison to the Scottish Government. Labour will end Tory austerity at source when the Leader of the Opposition steps into number 10 Downing Street. But in the meantime, Glasgow simply cannot take a further hit which is so disproportionate to that of the Scottish Government. I am continually being contacted by spontaneous local campaigns coming into existence seeking to fight these cuts which Glasgow is implementing due to the severe retrenchment that has been asked to make. We are facing the closure of entire facilities and services and a withdrawal of the Council from non-statutory quality of life provision in my constituency, one of the poorest parts of this country. Indeed, last year the SNP tried to pass the burden of cuts on to working parents by doubling childcare fees and was only again forced into a retreat after a determined local campaign. The Scottish Government needs to recognise that Glasgow's settlement should be no worse than the 1.6% cut that the Scottish Government block grant has faced since 2013. And I would plead with the Scottish Government and the UK Government to combine to ensure that, as a bare minimum, they rescind this negative multiplier effect. Happy to give way.
The resource budget of the Scottish Government has been cut 7% since 10% since 2010, not 1%. So this idea that they've only faced a 1% cut is nonsense.
Honourable is perhaps not fully aware that the fact that the total managed expenditure of the Scottish Government has only been cut by 1.6%. And of course, they, unlike councils, have total discretion over that spending, whereas councils are actually ring-fenced very heavily by the Scottish Government, which is why core budget cuts to councils have been much higher. That is the reality of the constraints faced by local government vis-à-vis central government in Edinburgh. I have to say that unless Scotland urgently addresses this issue of over-centralised governance from Edinburgh and rediscovers its radical tradition of municipal socialism, it is increasingly likely that Glasgow will fall further behind its peer cities in the UK, such as Manchester and Birmingham and Liverpool, as they establish new city-region governments centred around directly elected metro mayors. The constitutional debate has been preoccupied by nationalist questions over the distribution of powers between the British Parliament at Westminster and the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood. It is now incumbent upon us all to break this narcissistic duopoly of parliaments and strive to rediscover a radical tradition of municipal socialism. We in the Labour movement are not driven by nationalist sentiment when it comes to constitutional questions, by how best to structure government to serve the interests of delivering socialist policy. The atrophy of municipal government in Glasgow is therefore an urgent crisis that we must boldly address, and with imagination too. As we consider plans for a constitutional convention in the near future, the question of a municipal as well as parliamentary route to socialism must be firmly embedded at the heart of it.